Hey everybody, good to see you back again. So, did you show up for a fight? I didn't either. No matter. Old Christine here is always up for a rumble. So here is what we have on our plate today. We start with a very dodgy collar, followed by an even more questionable thrust washer that is falling apart. We've got a transmission input shaft that has had some work done up to this end, but it really doesn't look bad. And a transmission front cover that, like everything else, appears to have some stories to tell. And here's how all this is supposed to fit together. The input shaft slides into the front of the ampli-torque like that, and the main clutch is attached to the splines on this end. We then have this collar, goes inside of the release yoke, and this thrust washer engages with the notches that are on the collar. The front cover then goes over it all. The thrust washer bears up against that shiny ring in the center, and end play is controlled by this stack of shims that goes between the front cover and the case. And for this application, we are using the production 445 tractor spec of 8 to 15 thousandths end float on the planetary assembly. So now that we know what we're looking at, let's do the standard compare contrast between the prototype pieces and the production pieces. So at a glance, everything looks pretty similar, but they're also very different at the same time. Pretty much same old story. We'll start with the front cover, and all the major dimensions are the same between the prototype and the production. The prototype here has a 10x8824. You can see it, yep. And the production then, that is on the back side, that is a 10A7918. The input shafts also share all of the major dimensions. The clutch and pilot ends are exactly the same. The diameters are the same. The lengths are the same. The only difference is the splines on the ampli-torque end. So this prototype shaft has a very coarse spline. The production shaft has the normal fine spline. So that means the production shaft would fit, but it is not drop-in ready because it would not match the coarse splines that are corresponding in X231's original ampli-torque gear set. So you would have to change that outer sun gear out with the production one that has those finer splines to match. And now to the main difference that's causing me the problems on X231. So when we assemble this two-piece collar with thrust washer, it looks very similar to the one-piece version on the production. But whereas the prototype used just this bronze-faced thrust washer that spun up against this flat surface right here, the production one utilized a flat needle Torrington bearing with a separate race. This flange that is built into the collar was the race for the other side of that needle. And we have this generous relief built into the front cover, as well as this pocket that locates this tab on the bearing race, keeps the entire assembly from spinning and galling. So this is a bulletproof, or at least much better in thrust setup than what we have right here, and there are some definite problems with it. So taking our thrust collar and washer apart, we can see that we've got the remnants of two tabs on the back. This one is about half there, this one is gone, and the tabs correspond with these two slots in the collar. You can see where they've been cutting in pretty good right there, another witness mark right there, and they had to slot and tab this to the collar because they knew if they didn't, this steel collar would just saw its way right through the washer, because you have small surface area there, large surface area there. There's going to be more friction right here, less friction there. So this thing's just going to spin and take the center of it right out if they didn't do that. So we have a compromised design right from the start. Taking it all apart, looking at the layers, I cannot duplicate this as it stands. I'm not even going to try, and I don't have anything else that could be a good enough stand-in that's going to hold up and still be that thin. I do like the built-in flange on this collar on the production unit, and this collar is also a press fit, whereas this one is just slip fit on that shaft, and that leads to further wear. So here is another all or nothing scenario, just like we faced with the shift forks and rails. We cannot use one production piece in theory unless we use them all. So that means we would have to replace this planetary sun gear to fit the production input shaft that holds the production flanged collar, which uses the production flat Torrington bearing and also uses the production front cover. Now, needless to say, I don't want to have to go that far because we've already went further than I wanted to anyway as far as using production pieces. Remember, we started out by replacing everything in this whole back end except for this PTO shaft and one axle shaft with production pieces because all of the prototype stuff back here was destroyed. We could not use it. And we have to accept the fact that this tractor ceased to exist decades ago. This tractor is never going to be in this form ever again. So the very best that we can do is take the steps that are reasonable to honor what it used to be, while at the same time just accepting the fact that to move forward, certain changes are going to have to be made. So my plan involves creating a hybrid between these two input setups. We are going to abandon the two-piece prototype collar and thrust washer. I will then remove this one-piece collar from the production shaft and I will press it onto the prototype shaft. That will allow me to take full advantage of this nice wide thrust flange that's on the front of it. I can then make a custom-sized floating bronze thrust washer that will go between the flange right there on that collar and this surface on the back of the prototype front cover. We do have one more issue to address though from that swap. Look at the size difference in the collars. You can see the prototype one is smaller on the outside than the production one. So that means I will also have to replace the spider, or I should say swap out the spider that is in X231's prototype ampli torque, because that center hole in this one is too small for that production collar to go into it. We need this one with the bigger center hole. I believe everything will swap right over to this this production spider. I think we can reuse the prototype bronze collar, and everything else behind it and around it is all the same. So that is my plan for moving forward. Of course, we're going to have to get into it a ways to see how feasible it's going to be, but we can retain the most prototype pieces by taking that route and still have what should be a plenty solid in-thrust setup for the front of that transmission. So let's get on it. All right, we've got our first piece. So side-by-side comparison with the two-piece prototype design, this is a much better option. So I really don't feel too sad about seeing that other one go. But before we go and slam this onto the prototype input shaft, we want to be measured with every action that we take, because when you start intermixing production prototype parts, everything's a little bit different. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So we need to see if we can fit this larger spider that has to go with that sleeve into the prototype ampli torque unit that's in the front of that transmission. All right, so once again, what we are trying to remedy is this. All right, the production sleeve will not go into the prototype one, and the prototype sleeve, in addition to being smaller diameter, this is just mild steel. So again, I like this fully hardened production sleeve a lot better. And because it's so hard, it's not as easy as just throw it in the lathe and take that outside diameter down. That's why the easiest bit is probably going to be to change the spider, so long as this spider matches the prototype yoke, which I believe it should. When I had this part the first time, I didn't see anything that looked really different. But just to see if the plan is still alive, yeah, good so far. Yep. Same fit. Nice. Okay, with it all back together, try it. Very good. We've made a home for it. So with that, we've got one more piece of X231 to store away with the rest that did not make the cut. Ignore that flashlight for now. That is just there to help me illustrate the next couple of problems we are going to have to think our way through before we can put anything together. Going back to the prototype two-piece collar thrust washer, again, I just don't like this. So you see how we've got these wear rings in there that aren't even centered up with any of it, and yeah, we place a straight edge on the thrust washer portion. You can see we're heaved up towards the center. We've got gaps out there and out there. That is because that thin washer was coping with more thrust than it could really handle. So it has heaved up towards the center and it drops away towards the outside. So we're more like that and like that when we should be like that. And of course it wore the front cover in a corresponding manner. So see that sliver of light that's coming through right there, but we're tight toward the outside. So our thrust surface also tapers in towards the center. And that is something that I really should flatten back out to make it right. Plus, I would love to pick up about 20 thousandths more clearance if I could peel that much material away from that. That would make my new bronze thrust washer just that much more robust. And as long as we're in the neighborhood, there's one more bit of damage we should sort while we're here. At one point in time, a member of the Happy Hands Hacksaw Club decided to take a blade to the tube, and that slit resulted. I don't know why. It's X231, but I guess the best theory I have is the input seal that goes right in there maybe got to leaking so bad at one time that they had gear oil migrating down the tube and it was coming out the end and getting in their clutch, and they decided to give it a place to go before it got that far. That's my speculation. Either way, to address this and to address that, I think tube out of the cover is the best way to accomplish both. Okay, let's check our work. Good. So we're finished with the cover. We've got it flattened out again on the thrust surface. Everything is really good. And I also rehabbed the flange just a little bit. It wasn't super easy because we've got those two prior braze repairs where it looks like they've cracked the bolt holes out, but everything should be pretty good. And boy, you can tell this is a rough casting. When I had that thing in the lathe spinning around, even when I was indexing it, you can really tell there's thickness variations in it. There's quite a wobble around the rough cast inner rim. Doesn't matter. It's just you can tell they didn't spend a whole lot of time when they were setting the mold up for this. But when we indexed it, I did it both off of the machined counter bore for the input seal and the best I could on the outer flange. Like I said, it was pretty tough. Those were a little bit high, so we flushed those braze welds down. So our flange is decently flat. So we've got a good cover. Let's get the tube into shape next. So we have our fully reconditioned front cover and tube. There's our repair patch flushed out on the outside and the inside nicely. Found a new input seal, so we can take this old one, put with the discard pile. We're not going to put that seal into that counter bore right now because it's going to be a trial and error process getting that in play setting. There's no sense in having the new seal in there having to cope with all of that adversity when it doesn't need to be. So I think we can finally press this production sleeve onto the prototype shaft. So everything we've done to this point is to make sure this step is legal. All right, we made a home for it in the front there, verified it's all going to work. We have our rework done back here, should be conducive to our new modified thrust washer setup. Let's put it together. We're just trying to hide that wear line. It's about to go under the flange right now. Right there. Perfect. So to sum up what we've accomplished today, we completely eliminated this faulted prototype thrust setup, and the fatal flaw is the fact that this collar is so much smaller than the thrust surface on the front cover. Trying to bridge that gap with this laminated washer, it just was not strong enough to hold up. To help it make sense, I made this picture. So here was our old setup. We've got front cover there and there. We have our sleeve, this bottom piece right there and right there. And there is our laminated thrust washer. So everything in the transmission is pushing the sleeve this way, illustrated by that arrow and that arrow. The front cover is acting as a solid backstop, illustrated by that arrow and that arrow. And you see how they're offset? They're not in line with one another. And that laminated thrust washer right here was not strong enough to handle the load. So we really improved it in my mind. We were able to clearance everything so that we can go with this heavy duty flanged thrust collar from the production shaft. We kept everything else 10x. That will go in the front cover like this, and you see that flange does not pass through that thrust surface. It has a healthy overlap. So the only thing that's missing here is our new thrust washer. And that is the bottom picture right here. We have the new setup, so you can see front cover again. We have our collar with that built-in flange, and our new thrust washer is going to have healthy overlap front cover to flange, and that's going to keep those thrust arrows pretty much in line with one another. So this thrust washer stands little chance of collapsing like that old setup did. So this is our setup now, and I'm well satisfied with it. I believe that's going to perform just fine. So at this point, we're waiting for the new thrust washer to show up. Unfortunately, we're as far as we can get on this segment of the transmission as of right now. So that means next episode may be story time. A lot of people have been asking, again, how we ended up not only with one oddball prototype Minneapolis Moline, but two of them. And it's actually kind of an interesting story. So we might tell that next time to keep the feed rolling, seeing as how we're down waiting on parts. So thank you again for watching, everyone, and I hope to see y'all back for that.